What's up, guys? Coach Jared here on the Unfair Advantage podcast. I'll explain to Max what that means here in a second. Um, so I got a really special guest today. One of my old coaches, Max Aita. Max is probably one of the smartest weightlifting minds I would say in the world. And he's got a lot of cool things that he's working on right now. He's got a lot of great stories that uh, I still tell a lot of my athletes. So I'm really excited to have him on the podcast. He owns a gym in Oakland, California called Max's Gym. He's the founder of Weightlifting AI and Coach Logik, which is some stuff that he's got in the works right now. But anyways, I'll go ahead and kind of let him take it from here. Max, did I miss anything in that whole spiel?
I mean, handsome. That's the biggest one.
Yeah, you are
You
very
miss
handsome.
handsome, and I'm tall. I'm probably around 6 feet, so give or take.
That okay, that first of all is not true on the height thing. Because I'm 5'8" and I know you're not. I know you're not that much taller than me. How tall are you actually?
I'm probably your height, 5'8".
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, I or we could both be 6 foot today.
Yeah, let's round up round up the nearest 6 foot.
That's what a lot of these kids that we train, they're always yeah, dude, I'm 6 foot. I'm like, dude, no shot. No shot. So yeah,
What's like
Max,
a
he also has awesome beard.
yeah?
I've always been kind of jealous of Max's beard. I've never seen you without a beard. I think that would be kind of fun.
I'd look like I was about 12 years old. I think the last time I didn't have a beard was probably 15, 16 years ago. Um, when I was like 16, no, I was like 15 years old. I got my first job at as like a bag boy at a grocery store, and the manager came up to me at the end of the night, like the first couple nights, and he's like, "Hey, couple of the cashiers and I are gonna go get some steaks and beers at the bar if you want to come." And I was like, "I'm 14," and so I always looked older than I was. Now I feel like I've caught up to that. Like I look about as old as I am.
How old are you now?
Or I'll be 41 in 2 weeks.
Dang. All right, bro. You're getting old.
Yeah, yeah, almost
So
almost
I
over.
will say this. I don't really know. Like a lot of the questions I want to ask you today are kind of things that I actually don't know about you, and I'm curious. So, did you play sports when you were younger?
I never did. I started Olympic weightlifting when I was like 12 years old, 13. I was just like, I saw it on the Olympics. I saw the Olympics in Atlanta, 1996. I saw Naeem Suleimanoglu, who's like the most famous lifter of the time. And I was like, that's what I'm going to be. I always wanted to be super strong. That was like everything. And I just started like training, in my dad's, in the garage with my dad's like plastic and sand weights, but never did any sports, never did anything formal like that. No team sports.
Okay. Yeah, I was curious. I knew you started weightlifting really young, and was that under Steve Goff right away?
I didn't meet him till I probably turned 16 or 18 or something like that.
Okay. So when you first started weightlifting, was it just you watching? Well, I guess there wasn't a ton of videos back then, but how'd you get
N-
started?
n- no, so that was actually something funny. And this is kind of interesting for a lot of people, I think. Like I started looking at pictures in books, like sequence photos, and you'd look at like, okay, you've got this position, like you just kind of mimic it. But I had like no idea, like I didn't know there was any significance to the bar being at your knee and you have to be in this position or whatever. But at the same time, like probably the first day or two I snatched, or maybe first week, I snatched my body weight. I was like maybe 75. So like, I grew up in Montana. I was a really active kid. Like it was pretty, like it didn't seem that hard. It was just like, you know, you just kind of went and tried and you kind of figured it out. Whereas nowadays you have like every teaching progression under the sun. Everyone's got every little detail ironed out. But I just kind of went in and tried and did it. And, you know,
You snatched 75 within 1 week of training.
I think so. Yeah. I squatted around, I think I squatted 300-ish pounds, like really soon, really quickly, 315, like within the first few months of lifting. My legs got super strong, but like
That's
a
crazy.
lot of it was, I was just super active as a kid. Me and my friends would get on our bikes at like 7 a.m. on on the weekends or in summer and not come home till, midnight, 10 o'clock. And like, we were just riding everywhere and out in the woods and just, doing kid stuff. So like I was super active. I just never, yeah, it just came quickly to me. My upper body was not strong like that. It was all legs.
from all that bike riding, man. What did you have,
Yeah.
a
Yeah,
Huffy?
probably. Yeah. Yeah. If you can ride a Huffy 10 miles, you could probably squat 315.
These
10
kids
miles
don't even know
uphill.
what a don't even know
Oh
what a
gosh.
Huffy is, man. We had a
Yeah.
what was there another one called like a mongoose? I remember that was
Yeah.
like a step up. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
mongoose.
The Huffy I think it was made out of lead. The whole thing was a solid lead bike. It was so heavy. I
Yeah,
can't believe that. I haven't heard that in decades, man. The Huffy.
yeah, dude. I'm
And it
getting
like,
old now. I'm almost 30.
oh wow.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
20, 29, gonna be 30 here in a couple months. So point is, I know all about the Huffy.
Yeah. The old Huffy. It's such an
So
iconic thing from childhood.
well, yeah, and then you had the like we thought we were cool and we had the pegs and
Hmm.
and you'd try to like pop wheelies and stuff, and then you'd end up just like killing your shins on those pegs all the time,
Oh yeah. Yeah. We had we would ride our bikes. I got a bike at one point in time. It was like kind of BMX bike, and it had like the brake that had the like fully rotational like brake caliper. So you could
Mm,
spin the handlebars around and not tangle up the thing. And I thought I was like cool as shit because I was just like flipping the thing around. But I would get like
yep.
180. I couldn't get the 360. So my hands would just be crossed over. I thought I was like king shit when I was doing that, for like 12. And
That's
that was
awesome.
like the be all end all of, like cool kid shit to do.
All right, so let's go back to this. Did you said you learned from like looking at pictures and books. Had you ever seen a snatch done? Like, were there people around you doing snatches or
Yeah.
just the
So
pictures?
at some point I started that way. I bought, I think, the weightlifting encyclopedia, and I found some sequence photos and I did it. I saw videos obviously of like Piros Dimas and all these lifters that were, you know, huge names, and like you could find videos, but there was no YouTube. It was just like you would like search for videos, and there would be like a few sites where people would privately host some lifters, some videos. There was one guy, Ben Overcamp, who was a lifter who used to host like all these videos from nationals. But it was like you go to a site and there's a list of links and you just watch the links and a video plays. And so I saw that, but it wasn't really much better because I didn't really learn much about like what I was supposed to do. I was just kind of like fumbling around. And you get fixated when you're that into it in the beginning and you don't have a good like foundation of understanding. You get fixated on like little things you think are important but aren't. Like, oh, like, you got to throw your head back, or you got to do this thing with your elbow, and like you don't have a good understanding of like, no, that's not important. Like, you got to have your
That's
back
like
and
a
your hips in the right
Piro's thing.
spot. Yeah. And like you get stuck in this idea that like maybe that's the thing that like they're doing that makes them, lift more. And then eventually I did get like all the Iron Mind videos and watch those like VHS tapes of like the Bulgarians and all these things. And same thing though, like if you don't know what you're looking at, you have no idea what you're trying to do or what you're trying to understand, then it's just all looks the same and it's all kind of like a mystery.
So, didn't your dad own like a movie store?
Yeah. Yeah, he
Did
owned
you
a
get
video
any
store.
VHSs from there for weightlifting?
Yeah, I mean, no, he would never like kept VHS tapes, like no, there's no weightlifting tapes in there. No one would rent that shit.
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
a good
maybe
point.
if it's on the shelf, someone would rent it and come back and be super disappointed. What the fuck was this? Um, but yeah, I mean, I worked for him too. My brother and I worked for him. He had a small video store. He sold it in like he actually sold it like 2012. So he
Oh,
ran that
wow.
thing forever. Yeah, super impressive. Like, Netflix was operational and people were still renting videos. It's
So
Montana, so
you Right, I was gonna say, I'm from a small town too, in Illinois, technically, I live in Iowa now, but a lot of these city people, man, they don't know about the Huffy, right? They don't know about
no,
the life of that, like, that
no.
Montana life.
Yeah, that like I was like a chubby little kid, so like I was always like, a little insecure and like kind of shy, and so like I was just like constantly just like alone, riding my bike everywhere and whatever. So it wasn't like I was not into like team sports or anything like that. So my friends
So
and I were
did
just
yeah, did kids know that you did weightlifting, like, in high school, like or I guess middle school is when you started, like, were they like, "Hey, what's that weird shit that you do, in your garage or whatever?"
uh kind of. I mean, like, I think it was like I would do it, and then like I would do it, on my own or do it with, like at the school. But it wasn't like I don't think anyone cared. Like I don't think anyone really was like, "Oh, what's going on?" Like when I got to high school, they did like the bigger, faster, stronger program,
Mhm.
and everyone was doing like power cleans, and like I think it was just power cleans. But then it was just like this whole thing where it was like, kids in high school doing squats and deadlifts and power cleans and all that. And like I just was doing everything. I was training like twice a day in high school, 3 times a day. I would go like first period and do weightlifting on my own. Then I would go at lunch. Then I would like make my schedule work so that I could go like at 2 p.m. again. I just loved it. I just loved lifting.
So, were you, like, way better than everybody at power cleans right away and they like, "Why are you so good at these?"
I was better at them probably technically because I just did them so much more. But there was kids that were like stronger than me. Just they were just, more mature, just total like savages. My legs were super strong. I there was a back squat record at the end of high school, end of my senior year. There was a back squat record on the board they had in there, and it was like four something. It was probably about 195, and I front squatted 200. So like I was like totally into like, oh, if I front squat the record, that's like a total flex.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and it might have been like a football team record or something. Because there was kids that came through there that were super strong, like these like farm kids you get that were just like ridiculous. There was a kid that I
Mhm.
remember, a kid who was a sophomore who benched 405 for like 5, and he was just a freak. And he just
Yeah.
grew up on a farm, so to him it was just like, oh, this is easy.
Well, you got a lot of those kids around here, man. This is a farm area,
Yeah,
so and, those kids are like, "Yeah, we bale hay every day, pick up
yeah.
shit." Like, they're definitely the strong ones.
Oh, yeah, yeah, and you can tell the difference, right? Like, you see a kid that grows up like that with all that, like GPP training, basically, like just a bunch of random tasks that just require huge amounts of work capacity and, a decent amount of strength. And you get those kids, and it's like so obvious who's doing that versus the kids that are inside playing video games.
Right, right. So when you said you met Steve Goff when you were 16 then?
Yeah, I think it was about 16 or 17, like right at the end of high school, a year or two before the end of high school. And I actually met him because the University of Montana, um, no, sorry, Montana State in Bozeman, a couple guys came down from the school to do like a demo of Olympic weightlifting. They were weightlifters, and they did like some snatch and clean and jerk, and it was awesome. And they were like, if any of you guys are interested, like you can come up to the university and join the club. We have a weightlifting club. And that was like super cool to me because I was like, this is awesome. I can do this. I can go up there and I can be in this thing. And yes, I went up there, and then they introduced me, the guy Justin Braun, he introduced me to Steve, and I went and trained with him and Steve for, a few days. And then like every day after that, I was driving out to Steve's. The Actually kind of a funny story about Justin is that Justin Braun in Montana went to USC for a semester on a throwing scholarship and was roommates with Mark Bell's brother, Chris,
Chris?
who was
Wow.
who was friends with Dave Spitz of Cal Strength.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a super weird connection. Like, so Justin knew, he was roommates with Chris, knew Mark, knew Chris, obviously. Then he was he was friends with Dave, and I met Dave later on when I moved to Montana. It was random because Justin went there for like one semester to throw, and that was it. Um, so like really weird connections like that, like where you're just like, this is strange.
I did not know Chris Bell and Dave knew each other.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like a weird little space, right? Like all these people kind of knew each other in this tiny little tiny small group.
Oh,
So
yeah,
it's like a
because
small
Dave was
world.
or he was a thrower, wasn't he?
Yeah, Dave was a thrower at USC, and Justin was a thrower, obviously, and so like, yeah, just it's just a bizarre, like I always find that funny, that little connection like that.
Okay, and that makes sense. So, is that how Dave kind of, got in with Abijayev? Is through that whole
He
connection with Steve, or
No, he came along. He just brought him out. I mean, Dave made a bunch of money, was very successful, like businessman, and then he just was like, "I'm gonna train for the Olympics. I want to go in weightlifting." He connected with a guy named Alex Krychev, and they brought Abdreyev out, and that whole thing happened from there. Um, he offered like a thing where anybody could pay to come train with him. And so I was like super down. They told me at one time that like only 3 people emailed them, because it was like a weird thing with Abajev where it was just like this guy was banned and anyone who trained with him was banned, and so like all this weirdness around it. But yeah, it's kind of funny. Like that was the whole thing of like, you know, just randomly they brought this guy out that like I saw Naeem, who was like Abajev's, protege, and that got me into weightlifting, and then I had this opportunity to train with him and all this stuff. So just like a small world, you know.
so did Steve and like, I mean, he obviously kind of is known for his take on the Bulgarian method, right? Or, basically going up to maximum all the time,
Yeah.
right? Um,
Yeah.
did he get that from Abijayev? Like, did he know him at all?
No, he didn't. He never. I think he met him once or twice when he was here in the U.S. But he picked that all up. I think in the late '80s, early '90s. Like you have to imagine back then, like the Bulgarians were kind of like China is now, or was for a few years there. Like they're just dominating everybody. It was like they were the best on the planet for decades, and so like everybody was wondering what they did, and you'd hear stories like, oh, they do this and this, and it's like this little sort of whispers of it. And you'd have people come over. I think there was a guy, Angel Spasov, who came over and went around doing seminars and selling his stuff, telling everybody what they were doing, and popularized the idea of like step ups and things like that. But Steve's system evolved, Goff's system evolved from just like, hey, going heavy is good. You get stronger. Let's just go heavy on everything and just go really hard on everything. And so it was like, you know, before I met him, Gasha, a friend of mine who used to train with him, he would say like we would just do, if we're doing incline dumbbell press, we were doing it to failure every rep, every set, like just as heavy as possible. Everything was heavy, everything was maximum, everything was just like do more. Um, and it's like a heroic, like it sounds awesome. It sounds like, oh, I wish like just the guy who works the hardest is going to be strongest, but it's just so not the way that it works. There's so many such a more subtle kind of nuance to actually getting better at this stuff. Um, and it's like, unfortunately, it's not the guy who just, grinds himself up that gets the strongest.
So when you met Steve, how, like when you started training with him, what were your lifts at?
Probably in the like 80 something, maybe 90-ish, and like 110 probably like a
Like a
sub 200
200 kilo
total.
total or something?
Yeah,
Okay.
something like that. It's hard to even remember. I think pretty quickly I got up to about 120, 150. And then I started to kind of plateau there for a while. And then we just like, it was like, my back was way weaker than my legs. So I was just like, we were squatting so much. We would squat every single day, 2 to 4, 5 times a day, like a max squat single, just work up and hit a single, then maybe do a back off set of like 5, or like basically to failure. And I would just like, my legs just kept getting stronger, but my lifts didn't go up because like 120 or 130 in the clean would feel really heavy in the pull, but when it hit my shoulders, it would be like an empty bar. And it was like, I was always under this impression, like, man, I gotta just like get stronger. Like, and if I just squat this much, I'll be able to do more in the lift. And what would happen is like, you kind of do the numbers in your head and you kind of have to face reality when it's like, hey, for me to clean and jerk 200, I've got to squat 450. This doesn't seem like it's going to work, you know? Um,
Yeah, your
so
efficiency wasn't very
yeah,
good, basically, right?
totally, totally. And it was just like back strength. I just did not have the posterior chain, the back strength that I needed. And that was one of the things, like, for me, it was just like, I was too dogmatic and thinking like, this is how they do it. This is what the best guys do. I need to do that. Doing anything else is dumb. And it doesn't help when your coach is also in the same boat. And like, they think like everyone in the group is thinking that the solution is like this one thing because you desperately want that to be true, but it's just not. So
Right.
it was,
Though
that
I
was
heard
frustrating. That was,
yeah, I heard, actually, I think it was Glenn Penley before he passed. I think it was, like, him and John North were doing a podcast or something together, and I actually thought this was super interesting. So he was trying to explain basically why, he wouldn't recommend somebody do, like, the Bulgarian method, and he said that, 1, there wasn't enough volume in the squatting for somebody who's maybe natural, or maybe not even just the squatting, just there's not enough hypertrophy training essentially, um, to build a lot of muscle that you're going to need to then, produce force, in the lifts. And basically what he was saying was they didn't need in Bulgaria, they didn't need to do a lot of volume because the drugs were taking care of the hypertrophy. So essentially all they were doing was like neurological like efficiency training, which is just, going heavy in the snatch, clean, jerk, squats like all the time because like again, all the drugs they were taking were gonna build um kind of the muscle that they needed. I don't know. I just thought about that and I thought it made some sense because obviously we're, the way we would program is more, blocks and phasic structure, right? And, you got to build muscle first, and then you take the muscle you built and you kind of teach it to be more force producing. And then you take that more force producing muscle and you teach it to snatch and clean and jerk really heavy. Right. So I just thought that was interesting. It's like, hey, yeah, like, I guess like, if you're taking copious amounts of steroids, like you're probably going to build a lot of muscle. And now you just practice snatch and clean and jerk.
yeah, I mean, I think my views on, like, I was always curious, like, why did it work for some guys and not for others? And like, I don't think it is that it doesn't work for, like, it works for everybody exactly how it's gonna work. Like, it's not like it's doing exactly what it's gonna do. It's just like it's a bad plan in the sense that, like, you know, you look at different teams. You look at like the I'll give you a story. The best story about this is that a long time ago, Jim Schmitz, this really old school coach in the Bay Area here, someone asked him. They said, "Hey, I watched the Chinese team, and everybody on the team, like all their jerks are perfect. They do it perfectly every time. Why is that? Like, what are they doing? What's the secret to make it perfect?" And he said, "Well, the ones that couldn't do it perfect aren't on the team." And it was like a funny thing, but at the same time, you're like, oh, I get it. Like, these things, like, we're looking at governments building teams to win medals. They don't really care about whether they're right or wrong. All they care about is that they can get the result they're looking for. And so coaches, some are very smart and they create elaborate training systems or complex systems or can manage more difficult training systems that require a lot of intellect and thought to build. Um, in other cases, it's like you just find the 15 dudes that do really well when they go heavy all the time. And like the human body is just like a very, very complex system that if you apply a stimulus to it and you apply it enough times and it's, significantly hard enough, like people will adapt and some will do really well that way. I've had people walk in my gym and they can clean jerk 160 with minimal training. I've also had people that train for a decade and they just don't get that strong. Um, So like I think there's a lot to be said for it being more of a selection system than anything else. Like if you just take a lot of people, and Bulgaria did not have, I think there's a myth around the Bulgarian idea that they were grinding people up, and everybody was just like there was dozens of broken dudes. That's every sport. Like
Right.
how many football players in this country are fucked up, or broken? How many Russian weightlifters were injured? I mean, it happens in every sport when you're pushing people that hard. I think that a lot of it is they just found people that biased to being they were good at doing snatch and clean and jerk, and they benefited from training really heavy and really hard. Because there was probably other guys that were maybe not that way that might have been good weightlifters, so they trained differently. So I think there's just a lot of this, like, as a system, as a thing, like it's an oddity, It's like, okay, they just found this kind of like not a hack, but it's like this kind of unique system of like if we just go heavy and do the lifts, we'll be able to stimulate some guys enough that they make progress.
Yeah. So real quick, I think for some of my listeners, I need to preface what we're talking about. So like the Bulgarian method essentially is this idea that in Bulgaria, what was it in the 80s, 90s? Is that or
Yeah,
70s
like
maybe?
'70s to early 2000s.
Okay. They were basically their training style, and I don't know, maybe it is to till this day. They were dominating the sport of weightlifting. Um, and their coach, Ivan Abajev, was having them train to a maximum in essentially like highly specific, 3 to 4 exercises, maybe like snatch, clean and jerk, front squat, maybe back squat.
Yeah, yeah,
And they were doing that. That was their whole training. Essentially, it was like, you know, morning, lunch, evening, going up to heavy singles or maximum, multiple times per day, and that's all their training consisted of. So that's kind of what we're referring to, and what Max ended up training like for some of his life, right?
yeah,
Um, but I think we could draw a lot of parallels, like with a lot of the athletes we train. Um, what you're saying basically is like some of these people were gonna be good, despite their training, not because of what they did, right? And
yeah,
we see that a lot with, professional athletes in football, in basketball. I mean, have you ever seen LeBron James, like his workouts? Like, I mean,
yeah,
like Bosu ball shit, right? Like,
yeah, yeah.
so,
It's like
go ahead.
no, I'll just say I've worked with some NFL guys here and there, like over the decades, and some of them can't even do like a body weight air squat. Not because they're weak, they're just like they've never really done that. And it's like that's not gonna, they can't do an air squat. They couldn't deadlift, 500 pounds like with great form, but like they can take a football and bring it to the end zone, or they can
Right,
stop another guy. Like that's what their skill set is. That's what their body is essentially really well tuned
right.
for.
So basically, we see our athletes will show us a video of LeBron or somebody doing some dumb shit. And they're like, oh, I want to do this. And it's like, you don't understand. Like that guy was going to be in the NBA or the NFL or whatever
Yeah,
it is, no matter what, right? He could do as much dumb shit as he wants, and it ain't going to change anything. If you want to
yeah,
be even remotely close to that guy, you might have to actually train, hard and smart, right? And that's kind of
yeah,
like where we come in, right? So, but I just think it's funny because, you see this too in weightlifting, even at the US level. Like, there's just guys that, I mean, you and I both know train like assholes or don't
mhm,
even train that much, and they're studs, right?
yeah.
It's just how it is.
I would say for anyone who's a weightlifter that knows this, if you look at this progression, right? You've got a guy like Ian Wilson, right? And he's a lifter from a few years back. Ian Wilson, best 105 we ever had. He was awesome. 170-ish snatch, 173, 210 clean and jerk range, maybe 215. Um, awesome. And trained his ass off, like a huge student of the sport, like everything that, and an amazing competitor, and gets just railroaded by Wes Kitts, who comes into the sport late in life, who's just physically 2x what Ian is. Just, raw physical talent. Not as good of a weightlifter, and not as good of a competitor, but so much physically stronger. He totals 399, right?
I mean, he
Then you
played
look
Division One
now,
football, right?
yeah, he was a stud, right? Yeah, he's just a total tank. And then now you have this kid, Colby Ferguson, even less training, 2 years, and even stronger than Wes, and like you know, moves a little better. But like, it's amazing when you realize there's just levels. And like Colby, again, super talented athlete, but like Colby, if he'd have come around when Ian was lifting, because Ian was amazing. And then you said, here's some guy who's like just almost a standard deviation above him with almost no training, like a couple of years. And it just puts into perspective, like, there are just people, we always say it, like, there's people whose muscles are just made out of something else. Like, they just are, they were born with some kind of gifts that are just unreal. You get a guy like Shane Hammond was freakishly strong. I mean, he still has the records, an absolute tank, right? And now you get a couple of guys, there'll be some guy that pops up out of nowhere that'll be, beating his numbers. Like, and there just are people out there that are so beyond, from their starting point is above where somebody would get to in 15 years of training. So it's like you're just looking for those guys.
So I have a kind of a theory, and this is probably based on my own, weightlifting experience, and it's that some athletes or these guys that are genetically gifted, obviously they're genetically gifted, and that's why they're good. But also, I have a theory that essentially, like, as an athlete, you have these two lines. You have a line where if you don't train at least this hard, you don't get better, right? And then you have another line, and it's if you train this hard, you get hurt, right? And anyways, I think for me at least, as I got better at the sport, those lines became closer and closer together. Basically, like the amount of volume that I had to, squat or, when doing whatever lifts, it was a very fine line between what I could do and get better and what I could do and not get hurt. Right. And I think eventually those lines almost like were on top of each other. And then that's kind of
Yeah.
what you would call like your genetic limit. Right. Well, anyways, my theory is that these guys who are gifted, it's kind of funny because we're like, you got to work hard, you got to work hard. But the whole reason that they're good is because like they actually don't have to work that hard to get better. So then their line of getting injured and their line of getting better are really far apart.
Yeah.
That's kind of
I,
my
the, I can see that. I would, the thing I would add to that is like the distance between those lines is, it's like it almost be like a bucket, right? Like how much can you fill it up? And the filling it up is the type of training you're doing. And so our goals as coaches is always to be, I hate the word optimizing, but our goal is always to be making our training and finding training that's more efficient at doing what it's supposed to do. Not because we can just keep doing more, but because it is the most sustainable way to train. If we're in a place where we're doing, really high volume, 15 sets of 10 squat throughout the week, like, and you've done that, like, it just tears you up. And the end result is like, how much progress do you make towards your best snatch and clean and jerk? Um, and if you found training that was like half that much volume because it was just more well suited to exactly what you need, but you got just as strong, like that's way better. So that's like a coach's entire existence is geared around how can I make training more effective so that, like you're saying, you don't get to this point where you're just exhausting people with training to get sort of, diminishing returns or maybe like no return on that investment of work. It's a thing where there's a lot of factors there too, because the way an athlete responds, some people are just high responders. They do a little bit of training and they get super strong. Or they do like, if they have a higher starting point or any of these things that could be the case. The ultimate like breadth that they have to grow is genetic. We don't have any control of that. It's how much of that can we squeeze out, and can we do it in a way where the training we're doing is most effective for getting to that level. And I think that's where like our whole profession exists, right? Is how do we
yeah.
get like a kid or a athlete weightlifter to like actually make enough progress or make progress in a way that is not detrimental to future progress.
Yeah, I think, that high responder thing is kind of what I'm getting at is like, there's just people who you can give them a little bit of training and they make a ton of progress. And there's some that like, again, if you gave them the same amount of training, you wouldn't see any progress. And now I do think you can obviously, um, that changes, right? As you get better at the sport. For me, I think, one of my biggest flaws was that I jumped into way too much volume way too quickly. And this is like, with our kids, sometimes we have this balance with both the kid and the parent of, hey, we want to ease them into this a little bit, right? We almost want to take maybe not a minimum effective dose approach, but almost that where it's like, hey, let's see how little volume kind of we can do to see progress and then only add when we need to add. Right. Where I think what I did was I went on the internet when I started weightlifting and I'm like, what's the hardest program I can do? Because, that's
Yeah.
like sports. Like I come from, you didn't play sports growing up. I played sports. And it was just like, well, the attitude is just like, you just work as hard as you possibly can. Right. I'm a five
Yeah.
foot eight white guy who wanted to be a Division I basketball player. Like I had to work pretty hard, right? So,
Yeah.
like, and it didn't happen, right? It still didn't happen. I worked pretty hard. And anyway, so
Yeah.
that's the mindset that I had going into weightlifting. And here's the thing, it worked really well for like a couple
Yeah.
of years. And then it was like, again, flash in the pan weightlifter, that was me. I mean, I was a flash in the pan weightlifter, just could not stay healthy, that kind of thing. And it's like, it's really hard though to preach that long term approach to a kid, right? Or to a
Yeah.
parent.
Yeah, and I think a lot of kids, a lot of parents, a lot of people, like, they're just still in that mindset. Like, most people don't understand that training is it's a methodical, process-oriented thing. They think of it like you say, like, just this guy goes in the gym and works out all the time. That's why he's so big or whatever, so strong. Um, yeah, but if you look at training now at the highest levels, like, it's a departure from a lot of these, like, I say more is better. It's a departure from um, kind of like this idea that there's like a way to just like, oh, it's just this one thing you need to do. You just got to do more. You just got to go heavier or whatever. Just max out a lot more. Um, you just don't see that work because it is more meticulous. If it was that simple, like if it was really just like the people who train the hardest or the most or the longest, like are the best, like this stuff would be really easy. I mean, everybody would be able to get really, really strong and really, really fast and all these things. But it's so much more complex than that. So far nuanced. It has so much to do with understanding how somebody responds to the stimulus you give them, more than it has to do with the magnitude of that stimulus. And so you can get to this place where people just the general population doesn't understand that. But yeah, like you said, like with kids, it's like if you take kids and the first thing you're doing is just murdering them with training volume, like it's just it's such an unnecessary thing to do. They can train with a lot of volume, they can train a lot, but it's like doing it for the sake of just doing the hardest program is not the best way.
Right. Now, I think, I real quick, I do want to jump back into kind of your training, career and how, you kept going and then eventually became a coach. But I think it's important to note, like the reason you're not just saying this as somebody who didn't train hard. I mean, and that's kind of why I want to talk about it.
Yeah.
It's like you did the training, the dumb training, the training hard for the sake of training hard. And now you're looking back and you're saying, hey, this is not the route. So it's not just somebody
Yeah.
who is lazy, right? Because I think a lot of people, they say this, they're not a lot of people, but I think there's people that might say this who just don't want to train a lot, right? Or they, like a lot of kids, this is a tough balance for me as a coach because, you get to work with some high level weightlifters, right? And it's easy for you, not easy for you, but it's like, hey, your job might be, hey, I got to dial this guy back in this area or, shift gears in this area. Where, I mean, most of the time we get kids who need to learn how to work harder, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's a balance of like, hey, I do want you to work harder, but we have to do it in this direction. So, anyways, I just wanted to note that it's like, hey, you come from this background of squatting. For example, I think you said in a podcast once you squatted up to a maximum, what, 30 sometimes in a week? Is that
Oh, it was
right?
more than that. Like I would do, I when I was just squatting, I would do like almost every couple hours. I would go squat. There was days I squatted like, I mean, I do like 8 squat workouts. So like 4 in the morning, 4 in the afternoon, 5 days a week, and then like maybe 4 times only on Saturday. Um, so like, I was just like, after I hurt my wrist, I only squatted and all I did was just max out, and it was like, I, it was probably productive when I look back on it because outside of those last singles that I was failing, a lot of that work was actually productive because it was like the bar speed was really good. It wasn't too much volume in any one workout. I only did singles. But yeah, I mean, I was just pushing myself as hard as I could to bring my squat up. And that's all I did at the time. I wasn't doing anything else. So I just squatted. But yeah, I was in excess of at least 40 times in a week sometimes, like a max single. Um, and like, you know, I never had a problem doing the work. That wasn't even that big a deal. Like it was just labor. You just go in and do it. It's not like there's nothing special to it. But at the end of the day, it was just like not particularly productive. And then the same thing would happen with everything else too. Like, anything I would do was just like that method. Like, okay, I'll deadlift now. So I just started going heavy on deadlift every day. And that didn't last very long. That was hard. And then,
Yeah.
bench press, the same thing. But yeah, I mean, that stuff is just, there's a lot of kids out there too, a lot of people willing to work extremely hard. And there's some people that don't understand what it's like to do that, like where you would just be willing to just do anything and just push yourself as hard as you can. And I totally relate to what you're saying, like kids that just don't grasp what it's like to actually like work like extremely, extremely hard, like pushing yourself to the absolute limit all the time for days and weeks on end. That's a challenge. It's a unique thing. I think that's not a normal thing.
Right. I think it's tricky because we don't really ever want our kids to have to like, for example, like the kids at my gym, I don't want them to train like I trained at times, which was, you know,
Yeah.
stupid. Like it didn't make sense. It ended up, developing to some chronic injuries. But I don't think I'd have the perspective that I have if I didn't train like that, at least for a period of time. And so it's like this very tricky balance because I do feel like you have a unique perspective on training once you've allowed yourself to train to a certain level. So point kind of being with asking you how much you're squatting is like, dude, we have kids that they come in and they're like, well, I squatted 3 days ago, I can't squat today. It's like, oh
Yeah.
my God, like you are just so out of touch with reality. Like, I mean, you said you
Yeah.
squatted up to a single. So, and guys, when we talk about single, like, I mean, at the time you're probably squatting, I mean, a minimum of like 250 kilos,
Like 300
300.
when I was
So
doing that.
660 pounds, right? So you're
Mhm.
doing that or close to that potentially 8 times a day.
There was a period of time for like, I was several months where I squatted 300 kilos every single day, at least once.
And that's 7 days a week or
6 days a week. I mean, Sunday I would maybe do just like a light workout.
the Lord's day.
250, 250. Yeah, 250 for Jesus.
Okay, so point is, guys, like, and I hope we clip that part out and just say, like, hey, at the end of the day, it's like you're capable of a lot more than what you realize. Now, again, with that being said, we're not going to train you like that, but I just think it's super important to understand that, like, I just think more people at the young age, at least, again, and this is where I'm bringing a different perspective to this podcast, maybe than like what you're used to is like, I think more kids that I train need to learn how to work hard than how to dial things back.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's also like, you know, the body is resilient. Like people are much more robust and resilient than they might think. And that's just evident by looking at like the kind of stuff that happens in the world. Like there's just people out there doing things that like you would not think are going to survive. There's people just destroying themselves, training super hard, whatever it is. Like I definitely agree that like people need to have. I'm grateful, like you said, for that experience that I had because it put into perspective what that really can be, like what you can actually accomplish if you really want to push yourself. Is it the best way to train? Certainly not, but it's like it gives you a perspective that you wouldn't have if you didn't do it. And it's like you can't tell somebody that and have them understand what it's like, you know?
So You trained with Steve Goff for how long? How many years?
It was about me 8 years, 10 years.
Okay, and so, I mean, during that time, your training was very similar to, like, what we're describing, right? Like, a lot of squatting up to
Mhm.
singles, and then, for how long did you get to actually train with Abijayev?
I was living with him for, I think, about a year or so, maybe a little under a year.
And so you guys,
Yeah.
like, lived in a house together, is that right?
Yeah, we, like, lived in a house and trained in the garage, and, it was just, like, it was exactly the same training as I did with golf, like, nothing was different. It was just maximum every workout. The difference was that golf was, culturally very different, so he was like he was supportive. He was really supportive. He was aggressive and he pushed you really hard, but he was also like your biggest cheerleader.
Mhm,
Whereas Abijayev was a black hole. He just did not. It was like, he was old, his probably late 70s. And at the same time was just like an emotionless pit, just nothing, didn't feel for you or care.
so what, give me some stories. I know you've told me some crazy stories, but either one, Goff or Abijayev, but sometimes I need reminded of some of these. I remember one, when, like and this could be maybe I misremember. There's, like, pills in, like, a toilet or something like that maybe, or
Oh,
just
this was a story this is a story some old time guys told us. So my
okay.
coach golf, and he had a partner that was always with him, Mike Karchut, who was like kind of his, secondary coach. Karchut told us a story. So Karchut, grew up in the 60s, was a lifter in the 60s and 70s. I think he actually has like a streak of 22 national championship victories in USA lifting.
Yeah, I
So
know
he was
Mike
like,
because my first coach was, Lou DeMarco. So
yeah,
Lou
okay,
knows
yeah,
Mike, yeah.
yeah. So yeah, so Mike was telling us a story. He's like, there was a guy in the gym that would tell him well, here's my method for figuring out how much Dianabol to take. And he's like, every day I just add another pill, and then I just keep checking my stool, and until I see a little blue flecks, then I stop, then I back off one, and that's where I stay. That's like the sweet spot. Whether that's true or not, I
Right.
kind of suspect it's more of a joke, but he talked about it like it was serious. Like this guy was like, "That's my method." He would tell us stories about like you would go into a gym in this must have been the 70s, early 70s, and like on the like desk at the front of the gym, mind you, gyms weren't quite like they are today. Like there weren't like it was like commercial gym type stuff. These were like old school gyms.
Mhm.
There'd be a bowl of like Dianabol pills, just like 5 cents a piece or whatever, and people just buy them and eat them. Like that was the thing. Um, Glenn Penley told me a story about a gym in Texas where you had like these drop ceilings, the little like foam panels that drop into the little metal grid. You see most
Yep.
offices, and you go in the bathroom and you look up and all these syringes, guys would finish injecting themselves and just flick the syringe up into the ceiling and it would stick into the ceiling. And so you look up and he was like, yeah, there'd just be like dozens of syringes like stuck in the ceiling, like darts. Um, Different culture. Shit was very different back in the day. Yeah. This
We
is
have a
like,
power lifter, at our gym, and I took him to a meet. He compete well, USAPL is kinda not really a thing. He's in the one that's, like, connected with the IPF now, but anyways, there was, like, a local
mhm.
meet when he first got into powerlifting, and it was, like, I don't know, some federation that was not drug tested, but he went to it and he beat everybody. But the point is I went into the bathroom, and you know how they
Oh
have
yeah.
those, like, hazardous, like, or materials thing? I mean, just
A sharps
filled.
container. Yeah.
Yes, just filled to the fucking brim with needles. I've
Well,
never seen anything like it.
for me, what's crazy is I grew up in a very different time when you're like drugs and all that stuff was always like this very like, underground thing. Like it was like weird stuff that powerlifters did, and you're like a weightlifter and whatever. And like though does Eastern Europeans. Um, I mean, it would be so wild to be a kid today growing up and seeing like the amount of like content on the internet about how to take steroids is disturbing to me. it's objectively a very risky decision to make. Honestly, just health wise, but like it's like what a weird message, right? And you have to imagine the kind of like social media body issues and body dysmorphia people have and kids that are insecure and like you see videos like they'll pop up of like a lot of like bodybuilder type, influencers will talk about, drugs and taking drugs. It's almost become like this weird place of like, how is this like just a typical thing that's out there for these kids? Like we're talking about these stories as like they're just like comical and funny, but like it's
Right.
probably even more wild than that today where, it's like people can order it online, it's easy to get, and all these kids are just like, yeah, I would be like, yeah, it would be weird. But yeah, I mean, there's just like so much of that. My friend Martin, who's a Bulgarian lifter, he told me he was like, the drugs and the sports, like drugs and sports were born together. Like from day one, they were always intertwined. If you go back to like Jesse Owens was taking cocaine and first wasn't the first 4 minute mile, sub 4 minute mile. He was on, he took like strychnine before. Like this is like doping in sports is like goes hand in hand. But that's kind of the nature of people, right? Is like finding ways to augment their performances or improve their intellect or whatever it is to get better at something. And so they create these scenarios they can use a substance or whatever to get better. Um, but yeah, it's a funny game. It's a wild world.
Yeah, again, for my audience, it's important to note I'm kind of glossing over this because, Max and I have talked about this before, but, we're not, you know, most lifters in the United States are
Yeah.
not taking steroids, right? But back in the 70s, right? And I mean, still now internationally, um, drugs are a huge part of the sport of Olympic weightlifting simply because they help a lot, right? Like in the sport of weightlifting. I mean, more so than I think a lot of other sports, maybe all other sports, right?
Yeah. I think there's something to be said too about like the nature of what steroids do to creativity in sports. Like you look at all the top countries in the world and they probably set themselves back a bit with as far as like learning about training because they if your whole system is like, oh, these drugs are so effective, all we need to do is focus on passing tests or bribing people to pass tests. Like, where does the creativity in like science and sports and trying to find better ways of training or like, and you look at it's obvious. You look at like, certain lifters like the Iranians or, whoever else, like this looks so bad. Like they're not beautiful lifters. Their technique is rough. Like, and it's all coming from the fact that like, well, if your whole strategy is just train super heavy, take drugs and get away with it, like who cares about learning to refine technique if you can just be a little bit stronger and make a bigger lift? So I think that's the unfortunate side of it is that like it just kind of it doesn't further the sport in the long term. It just basically kind of drives a little bit forward with one or two people, right? The top people get better, but you're not getting this like everyone's learning about how to train better and do these things, or we become smarter.
Would you say that, I don't know, would you say coaches in the United States now are kind of on the cutting edge almost of training? I mean, I think we're going to start seeing like, I mean, a lot of weightlifters from the United States that are going to be winning medals who are presumably not taking steroids and they're beating
Hmm.
people who you and I both know are probably taking steroids. So there must be some sort of one, their genetic, like again, a Kobe Ferguson, right?
Yeah,
There's going to be some genetic freaks out there, right? We've always joked about if these NFL guys decided to quit making money one day and come be weightlifters, we'd all be screwed, right? But
yeah.
do you think there's something to, coaching in the United States specifically that's maybe um, getting better or ahead of some of these other countries?
I think I think that in the US we have a culture of there's a very different vibe in the US than a lot of places, which is like you can call it like the blue sky sort of mentality, which is that everybody here, I think if you asked most people on the street in the United States, like, could you be anything you wanted to be in this country? And they would all say yes. Like a lot of people would say, yeah, for sure. Like there's open skies to like excel and to do whatever. And that gives everybody here a sense of like you can be anything if you put your mind to it. And if you try and you're inventive and you do these things, you can get better. And so I think that culturally drives forward a lot of people where they see like, hey, there's an opportunity to be a great coach here or a great athlete. And they might recruit somebody or bring someone in. Like no one sees it as like, well, you know, we're not going to be that good, so let's not try. Like that's not an
Right.
American ideal by any stretch. It's all about like everybody can do as much as they want to do. I think that in the future we're going to see a lot more top Americans doing that because you have so much more incentive to do it and there's so much less friction to feel like hey, you can succeed here no matter who you are. You could go from not being a coach to being a coach and coaching a Colby Ferguson and be amazing and like live out your dreams of being some fantastic famous coach or whatever it is. And same with an athlete, like you could actually achieve something if you put your mind to it. I think that mentality is what drives us forward, but that's like for sure the US is going to have, I think, more and more top, like high placing people. I think it's slower on the men's side because there's just so much more opportunity for men. So you're not going to be able to pull them away from whatever. And personally, like I would, if I had a kid who was capable of playing in the NFL and I was like pushing him to be a weightlifter, I would probably feel bad about myself. I don't know if I could live with myself for, robbing somebody of that kind of opportunity. But yeah, I think there's a lot to say for like, we're the next 10 Colby Fergusons, right? Aaron Williams,
Yep.
10 Hampton Morris is like, they're going to be there. Like they're out there. It's like the more you find them, the more we're going to look amazing. I mean, our women's team is Olivia Reeves is the most dominant girl in that weight class. I mean, she smashed China and North Korea, um, you know, head to head. So, I don't care if it's like someone's done bigger lifts somewhere else. Like, you know, my uncle did the world record in my grandma's basement. No one saw it, but he
Right.
did. So like she won head to head. To me, that's the sport. Um, yeah, I think, yeah, for sure. To touch on that point, like the U.S. we're going to have a lot of good lifters coming up. I think we have a chance to really do something in the next decade.
That's a good point. I guess I hadn't thought that closely about how, there's a lot more monetary incentive in male sports, right? In the United States,
Yeah,
right? Football, obviously basketball, right? Those sports. So we're losing a lot of our talent, kind of obviously to those sports, and you don't blame them for that. I mean, we train a lot of athletes and, um, we incorporate, some cleans and stuff into their training, but I would never tell a kid, hey, like you should ditch this sport that you have like a division 1 potential at to go be a weightlifter, right? And but it's funny because there are more girls. We actually have more female weightlifters than we do male. And I
yeah,
think it's, similar is like, hey, they're seeing the writing on the wall a little bit. And it's like, hey, there's not a ton of future for me um, in college sports or beyond. So maybe I'll try this weightlifting thing out. And, we eventually, and this is kind of a tricky balance for me, is like, hey, when do I say, hey, weightlifting might be a better option than the sport you came to me to get better at, right? Um, but again, I
yeah,
think on the girl side, I don't feel quite so bad about being like, hey, yeah, you should switch to weightlifting because at the end of the day, there's nothing there, right? Kind of
yeah,
above that.
100%. Yeah. I mean,
So,
most of the best lifters
yeah.
I worked with were females, and they had there's just so much more room for them.
Let's touch base on what you got going on. So, Coach Logic is kind of the new thing that you and I have been talking
Yeah,
about. We're going to start using it at our gym and our facility, and I'm really excited because one, it's going to make my life a lot easier as a coach. I think we use another platform currently that our athletes are familiar with, but they don't realize that it's a big pain in the butt on our end for a lot of things. And I don't think they really realize that I think a lot of athletes don't realize that their user experience can be a lot better than what it currently is. And also, the other reason I'm really excited about it is I want to be a better coach. And I think that,
mhm,
with the addition of AI and kind of these, the technology that we're seeing in today's world, um, I just don't think that a lot of people are utilizing that as they should, right? I mean, our kids are over here utilizing ChatGPT to do their homework, right, and write their
Yeah.
papers. And I mean, damn, it sounds good as shit, right? It's like, wow, I couldn't write that good, but yet, we're not really utilizing it in our coaching. So, anyways, yeah, go ahead and tell us a little bit more about Coach Logic.
Yeah, I mean, for me, a lot of it was like I created it. I've always wanted to do something like this because I felt like like you said, there's like a lack of like anything out there to help you become a better coach. Um, One of the problems is like, as you know, when you have a lot of athletes, like you end up deviating to the thing that you can get done. The program I can write today is the program I write, not the best program necessarily. I don't take the time to make an individualized program for 3 different people that need it because it's a lot of time and it's like, this is good enough. So as a coach, you need 2 things to be really good. You need to be able to like take intelligence from the training and use it to give somebody a better program or to do better coaching. And that's kind of what our goal is like, it's not just a coaching platform with like the same stuff everything has. You can do workouts, you can write workouts, there's an app, there's all these things. It's that there's a lot of intelligence inside the app as far as like we understand a lot about exercises. We have a lot of information we can deliver to you about what someone's doing, what impact it might have. So it's not just a platform to manage people. It's a platform to, augment someone's coaching. The AI stuff is amazing to me because you can see it in real time out here in the Bay Area. Like it just eats people's jobs. Like so many
Mhm.
developers will probably be out of jobs in the next 5 years. Like I would be surprised if in 5 years you could get a job as a junior developer, like a junior software engineer, where today that would pay you 100,000 a year plus. That might not even exist in 5 years. It might even be shorter than that. My developer, my partner, he wrote, this won't mean a lot to most people, but he wrote about 30,000 lines of code in about 3 days with AI tools, which is insane. Like that's massive
Yeah.
amount. He doubled the size of our code base with a bunch of stuff he had to add in a week, which is, maybe 200,000 lines of code. Like it's insane how efficient, how fast you can become. We want to build the same thing for coaches where it's like, you should be able to just talk to your training, right? You should be able to talk to your training system, talk to your program, manage a lot of the details and stuff with your knowledge and with its knowledge without having to sit there and be like, I'm going to write a program just by typing in a bunch of words and text. I'm like, okay, this is fine. That's good. Kind of think about it. Um, and then data is like huge. I mean, if you want to do really good training, you have to look at the data. I find it amazing that people will not diet or they'll diet, but they won't track calories or track anything. It's like, we have no idea what you're doing and then train and not track anything. It's like, these are the two simplest, like everything in these 2 elements is just all numbers and people don't take the time to track it or do that stuff. And I think part of it is the tools that are out there. You've got spreadsheets, but those are complicated to use. You have to figure out how to, do a bunch of stuff. It's also like there's no structure. You're just kind of figuring it all out. And then you have other apps as well, but like there's no really good data tracking. I want to make sure that we have a product that really gives you like an enormous amount of data and detail into people's training so you can make great choices. It's made me a better coach already. Like I had a woman who just went to the Arnold and put 20 kilos on her powerlifting total purely
Wow.
from moving her onto this platform because I could look at her training day to day and say, oh, like I can see exactly what's going on set to set and all this and make really finite adjustments. That doesn't even take that long, but it's like if you can sit there and say, you know what, last week that looked a little harder than it should have, and you rated it kind of heavy, I'm going to go a little bit less this week and maybe just jump you up 2 kilos. You're fitting someone's response to training to the next training load you give them. And that's what great training is. It's just matching the amount of prescribed work and training to exactly what someone's current state of fitness is. And so, yeah, I mean, it's like, that's our goal, make better coaches.
I thought, Dylan Cooper did a video with Hampton recently, right? And it was great.
Hmm.
He talks about how analytical he is and how he tracks, like, I mean, like, literally
Yeah.
everything. And, I just thought, I'm like, "Man, it would be really cool, if one, we all could do that. I mean, it would take discipline, but I think, it's easier for one person to track their own, macros, right? Or
Yeah.
to track their own training, right? But it's hard when you have a roster of 100 athletes that you're
Yeah.
coaching and you're trying to track all this and then base their future training off of it. It just takes a lot of time, right? Honestly. So I think a lot of coaches they just don't do it. Right. And then
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
guessing essentially, right? And I think
For
if
sure.
we can be efficient with our tracking and be efficient with the way that we use the analytics, then coaches are going to want to utilize those going
Yes.
forward.
Part of it too is like, I can guarantee every single athlete that I've worked with that I sat down and tracked all of the training they did, they got better because of it. There was never a person that didn't improve as a result of that. And like you said, it's like a lot of it is about getting something for the work. Because you could track all of it in a spreadsheet, but if you do nothing with the data, like people write their training down in a training journal and they never look at it again. Like that's a neat practice, and maybe it's just like cathartic, but it's like,
Mhm.
to me, it's like you need to, like, if you track the data, you should get something out of that, like some intelligence, something that can tell you like, hey, here's what's gone on the last 6 weeks. And that's what we're working to build, is this kind of thing. It's like an assistant coach, basically, you could think of, where the AI acts like a co-pilot and can give you data that's going to be meaningful to you.
Yeah, and like Hampton, in that situation, they would look back if training wasn't going well and say, hey, well, they're tracking sleeve, they're tracking, I mean, a bunch of stuff, but they're looking
Yeah.
back and they're saying, hey, what's different? What was different about this period of time
Yeah.
where things weren't going well? And you could do the same thing with your app, right? With Coach Logic is like look back and say, all right, hey, what were we doing during this phase that was working
Yes.
really well, or what were we doing that wasn't working really well? And that's just something with the platform we use, it's just really not possible.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And that's what you have to do, right? Is like, it's not about when things are going well. It's like when they stop going well, you have to know what to change, right? And if you can't reference anything, you have no data, you're just like, totally guessing.
It's kinda like, I know, like, when my lifts aren't feeling good, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, but I would go back to old videos where I felt like lifts were
Yeah.
going well, and I'm just, like, watching these videos, like, "What was I doing differently?" Right? And I
Yeah.
mean, it's kinda the same thing, but
Yeah.
this is with more objective, like because you're kinda looking at it and
Yeah.
you're like, "Okay, I don't really know if I," you don't really know if it did feel better at that time or what you were doing differently necessarily, but with these numbers, it's pretty easy to be like, wait a second. Like, I mean, and I've done this as a coach. An athlete's been come up to me before and been like, hey, we haven't, do you realize how low our volume on front squats has been lately? And
Yeah.
I kinda like, you know what I'm saying? And I guess there's been times where I'm like, I guess I really didn't realize that. And, maybe their jerks are down a little bit, right? They've been struggling with
Totally.
jerks. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. Let's bump your front squat. Maybe we'll add a day. Maybe we'll add some frequency to it, right? Or something. And, now their jerks are feeling better, right? So, but it's again, I lose track of that at times.
Yeah. Exactly what you just said with the jerk. I was just talking to an athlete in our gym. I was showing him the program. I showed him the planner in the app, and I was like, he was like missing jerks to the Arnold. And I said, let's look at your jerk. So we went to his jerk section, and we're like, it's as soon as I pull up the calendar, it's like it shows me the graph of the volume in every week for the jerk. And it's like every other week there's some volume. Like I was like, well, we didn't even do enough jerks. Like this is obviously like super easy to tell. That might not have been the case if you just kind of thought like, well, I thought we were doing a lot of jerks. We did a lot of clean and jerks. But then you look at it, you're like, no way,
Mhm.
we were way off. We need to do this every week, and we need to have a dedicated day to it. So it's like those decisions are so much easier when data is in front of you. And for us, it's about like, what do we track? What do coaches need? What is going to make you a better coach? We don't want to waste time with stuff that's like, you know, arbitrary or wasteful, that's not useful to know. We want to give you real information, like insight as to what you should do, not just numbers on a screen.
Yeah. So I'm super excited for that. We're definitely going to be incorporating that here in the next couple weeks with some of our athletes. Or do you have a timeline on is it ready to go? Like, are there can coaches kind of go
Yeah,
into
we're
the website?
yeah, you can go on the website, you can sign up. Up to 3 athletes is free, so if you just use it, you can try the freemium. I would say we're in, like, the end of the late stage beta with it, so it's like, there's a lot of stuff that's I mean, everything is functional and operational, it's all workflow, I've been using it for months. Um, as far as, like, features go, I mean, we're adding features basically every day, every week. We work on
Mhm.
it nonstop. I'm working from 7 AM to about 1 or 2 AM every day. And same with my partner. So I mean, we were just cranking on it. But yeah, try it out. I mean, if you have feedback or you have an idea, like something you'd want to see, like let us know.
Awesome. So I like to close these out. Again, we call this the Unfair Advantage podcast. And what that kind of means is like every athlete has stuff like, first of all, it's kind of an ironic thing because life isn't fair, right? We all have
Mhm.
like nothing really is fair. So everything's unfair, but I think a lot of people are able to point at one thing that they seem to do that they derive a lot of their success from. So, one, I'll ask you kind of, hey, what's like the one thing that you think that you're really good at in life that you think, helped kind of propel you forward? And then what I want to ask you too is what are some like, can you think of some athletes that you've worked with or that you've seen and you're like, okay, this person, I've never seen anybody else with this quality that they have. Like it's uncanny. So I just think you're a good person to ask this to because I think you could maybe have some unique perspective. Is there anything you can think of?
Yeah, I would say my unfair advantage is just persistence. I just every day just keep pushing forward. Like I have just as persistent as possible. I learned that a long time ago from training with the Bulgarians basically and training with golf. Like if you just never give up, eventually you'll get somewhere. Um, as far as an athlete with an uncanny ability, uh, that's a tough one. I mean, everyone's a little different. They all have different qualities. I would say probably, Alex LaChance to me was like one of the most driven, like to like at a crazy level. Like she was able to, no matter what you asked her to do, she would do it. And it was like, she didn't, she had like zero resistance or ego about anything. Like if you'd have told her, hey, you got to squat 400 reps today at 150 kilo, your maximum, she would try it. Like she wouldn't even question it. She'd be like, okay, like I've never seen that. I haven't seen that level of something like that in a lot of people. Maybe just a couple. Really, she stood out as being one of the ones like that.
So it's almost like eagerness or like maybe she basically just buys in,
Yeah,
to
yeah.
what she's doing.
Just full on commitment, zero resistance to whatever is the way to do it. I'm going to do that.
And I think that's the best way to learn. I think you can, if you buy into something, say you hire a coach and you buy in and then, you find that you disagree with a lot of their methodology later on. I think that's one thing. But I think I'm sure you've experienced this where an athletes start, they don't always buy in. And then it's tough. It's
Yeah,
like, well, did you really not make progress because you didn't buy in at all? Like, or did you not make progress because what we were doing wasn't working? Like, which one is it?
100%. And that's a, yeah, to sell my own product again, but like, that's part of like, if you can't even explain your plan, like, how
Mhm.
are you going to get someone to buy in? Like part of the coaching is about like selling yourself and selling the value of what you're doing. So if you can't even convey to somebody, hey, like this is the way we're going to do it. I'm going to show you the data. Then how are they going to buy in? But like buying in is, some people are just, they are like that. And it's a most pleasurable thing to work with. Who just
Yeah.
believes from day one they're going to do whatever.
It's almost like a naivety, right? Like, they're just like,
Yeah.
it's like, I would
Yeah.
like, "Are you sure
Yeah.
you don't have any questions for me?" Like, right now, like,
Yeah.
we have one athlete that specifically is like that, and it's so fun because like, they're always, like, in a good it seems like they're in a good mood and ready to go. It's really awesome. So,
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
awesome, man. Well, I really appreciate you doing this. We'll talk more, about the app, getting me set up on that.
Yeah.
And hopefully, like I said, if you're able to do this again someday, that'd be sweet. I got a lot more
Oh,
things I
yeah,
wanna
for
talk
sure.
about, so
Absolutely, absolutely. Very cool.
cool,
Thanks for
man.
having me.
Alright. Yeah, we'll see you next time, man.
Yep. Take care.